All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you all for showing up this morning to officially welcome back Kelly Krauskopf as President of Basketball Business Operations for the Indiana Fever.
No one anticipated this. The woman in charge of the entire organization, the president of the Indiana Fever. At last, I said the silent portion aloud. Furthermore, her statement raised more than just eyebrows. T completely changed the basketball world. On fire. Because for the first time, the reality of what's actually happening within that franchise, the politics, the conflict between creating a champion and a brand, the pressure, and the relationships in the locker room all broke down. Additionally, hearing the whole story alters what you believe to be true about Caitlin Clark's circumstances in Indiana. Let's return to the beginning of this story. Prior to Caitlin Clark ever placing, Indiana was one of the most unmemorable teams in all of professional basketball when wearing a Fever outfit. There will be 6 victories in 2021, 5 in 2022, and 13 in 2023. They were a joke for almost 10 years. No spotlight, no buzz, no fans. The cameras did not show up. Seats weren't being filled, and the WNBA scene had entirely passed past the Fever, whatever it was. That was the truth. A once proud franchise turned into a mere afterthought. However, despite their best efforts, no one in that front office could have planned what transpired. As soon as the first overall pick in the 2024 WNBA draft entered the room, everything completely changed. Caitlin Clark transformed the entire league, not just the Fever. Everywhere she goes, sellout crowds. Played, jerseys flying off the shops, TV ratings smashing records, and a media frenzy that hadn't been observed in women's basketball since, well, the beginning and the midst of the eruption. The organization was forced to make a decision. Were they going to try to steer that wave in a different direction, or were they going to ride it? That's when the entire narrative becomes intriguing. Because the Fever required someone at the top who could relate. Just what they had, a once-in-a-generation athlete who was revolutionizing the possibilities for women's sports. The front staff made a decision that surprised a lot of people. Kelly Krauskopf was brought in as their new president of business operations and basketball. T made sense on paper. Krauskopf was responsible for creating the Fever. Previously, was a member of the 2012 championship winning team, and had first-hand knowledge of the company. She was introduced by the squad with all the anticipated excitement. However, starting with her initial press conference, something in her messages raised concerns that many people at the time ignored, but they would later come back to haunt her. Months later, the entire organization. The warning indicators were hidden in plain sight, and no one noticed them until it was too late. This is the point at when everything fell apart. July 2025. Caitlin is being dealt with by the Fever. Clark's absence due to injury. By that point in the season, Clark had only played 11 games due to a groin injury that had been wearing her down for weeks. Fans are irritated. The club is on the verge of making the playoffs. The pressure is increasing. In the midst of all of that, video from Krauskopf's initial news conference was released the same day. Strangely resurfaces on social media. The internet discovers something hidden within that October 2024 speech that the majority of people had completely ignored. Krauskopf had spoken the quiet section aloud during that news conference while staring directly into the cameras. This relates to the Indiana Fever. Indeed, Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston are key players. And we will keep adding to that. However, I want this team to be a national leader and a household name. A long-lasting brand, such as Apple. 5 words, such as Apple or whatever. It only required that. The video became viral in a matter of hours, and the fanbase exploded. Because of what many individuals have heard. That sentence was a warning rather than a vision. The response was unprecedented for the Fever front office. Prior to this, fans weren't only angry. They were organized, boisterous, and impossible to ignore in their rage. Because of what Apple actually accomplished, the parallel struck a different chord. They completely created their identity, centered on a single visionary, Steve Jobs. The empire almost fell apart the minute he left. Thus, when Clark's followers heard, they heard something in the Fever president's identical simile that seemed illuminating. As if Clark was already viewed by the organization as a component of the puzzle rather than its focal point. Long-lasting brands embrace their visionary, a fan retaliated on social internet. Because Steve Jobs was the company's visionary, Apple became a global icon, as well as its celebrity. Another fan didn't hold back either. When Clark ultimately determines that she has had enough of what? The Fever will acknowledge that they lost the greatest chance in the front office dumpster fire. Women's sports history. The comment sections, message boards, and responses were all overrun with the same fundamental feeling. You don't minimize the most significant player this team has ever had, and you don't go from constructing all around her. The pushback was a verdict, not just noise. And a member of that group noticed how horrible things were becoming. Because Krauskopf's whole X account went viral within hours of the video. Completely disappeared. No declaration, no justification. There was only quiet where there had been a social media attention only a few days prior. This is where it becomes even more complex. Due to the fact that the front office was being attacked on the internet, the athletes on the court, the ones who really dressed next to Caitlin Clark each night, were narrating an entirely other, far more truthful story. One of Clark's best friends, Lexi Hull, on the team, didn't hold back when they sat down for a profile in Glamour magazine. Paul made a statement that everyone, although practically no one wearing a Fever suit had previously been willing to publicly acknowledge what was already known within the league. Because of the media focus, I believe there is some jealousy surrounding the Fever, and the supporters who have supported us ever since Caitlin arrived. She went even farther, disclosing that groups surrounding the league has been publicly discussing things like, "We can't let the Fever win," in their own locker rooms. Hull's remarks revealed an unpleasant reality that had been developing for 2 seasons. The Fever are no longer limited to basketball games. Each time they take the court, they are entering a setting where other teams have deliberately ringed them due to who is on their roster, rather than the team's overall performance, due to a single individual. Sophie Cunningham went one step farther. The player who became known as Clark's enforcer on the floor, the one who made it obvious early on that taking cheap shots at her buddy would have repercussions, having already revealed what the entire league had been whispering. Cunningham claimed to have heard it prior to joining Indiana. During her time in Phoenix, she claimed that opponents weren't merely attempting to have explicit chats about Clark in the locker room. They were attempting to make a point in order to prevail. The story of aggressively attacking Clark and welcoming her to the throughout the entire season, a W moment that appeared to last on forever was captured on camera. The physical act aimed at even impartial spectators could not help but notice Clark's level. Additionally, by the time her season ended due to a groin injury, after just 13 games, many were really questioning whether the officiating had adequately safeguarded her. Should have. A growing number of people who were paying careful attention said that the answer was no, but that was only the surface of the seething substance beneath. Because, even if everything was happening in the public eye, the real tale of what's my desire to be Caitlin Clark's colleague was beginning to surface. Furthermore, it wasn't what the critics had been anticipating. It was a straightforward story that Caitlin Clark's detractors had pushed the hardest. That she caused trouble in the changing area. Players were envious of her. The attention and fame were causing cracks that would prevent any squad from surviving. In September, Hall of Famer Cheryl Swoops appeared on a podcast, 2024, and dropped a bomb, claiming that important figures involved in the Fever were discreetly expressing their disinterest in attending. That they were no longer able to handle the circumstances around Clark. It quickly spread. It was repeated all over the place. And as they entered their second season together, it became a part of the background noise that accompanied the Fever. However, when Clark was questioned about it, she made an appearance as a guest on a different March Madness telecast hosted by. She tackled it head-on by Sue Bird and Diana Taurasi. She wasn't upset. She didn't act defensively. She was surprisingly composed about. It basically means that you grow accustomed to others believing they are aware of what goes on behind closed doors. Doors when they don't. Additionally, the teammates present in that locker room continued to support her. When Clark returned from her teammates rushed the court when she sustained an injury during the 2025 playoffs. They interrupted her interview after the game. They arrived for her at moments that no one had planned. Even the jubilation in the locker room when the Fever won the Commissioner's Cup. The room was real. Players were truly delighted for one another, sharing laughs, and bonding in a way that didn't read like a show. This is what no one in the media has yet to compile. The Fever's story was never primarily about how well-liked Caitlin Clark was by her teammates. It concerned the willingness of the front office above them all. Must surround her with the appropriate parts and give the vision their whole attention. That's the difference. Because at the judicial level, the connections were genuine. Clark was close to Aaliyah Boston. Lexi Hull was guarded. Sophie Cunningham is one of the new arrivals. Before they had even played a game together, they came in gushing over Clark. The rookie who advanced to the final was Michaela Timpson. Roster expressed genuine admiration for Clark in a way that is impossible to feign. When Clark posted remarks on Instagram, 2 of her teammates were involved in the expanded draft, contributing pieces such as "My Aussie for Life" for Chloe Bibby and "Cub, you have my undying love" for Christy Wallace. These were genuine connections. However, connections don't win titles on their own. And that was the tension at the heart of it all. What Kelly Krauskopf stated during the press conference in October 2024. The complete version, not just the soundbite from Apple, included something that many people overlooked in their haste to express their displeasure. When Krauskopf expressed her desire to, she also discussed the long game and the Fever to be a lasting brand. She said that Caitlin Clark was. When Indiana won its lone championship in 2012, I was 10 years old. Sometimes it takes a generation to reach the next level. That the organization had been working for someone else all along, sowing the seeds for a 10-year-old who might find inspiration someplace. By the Fever we're experiencing at the moment, it completely depends on whether you consider that to be vision or deflection. On what you think the true priorities of the front office are. However, this is something that cannot be disputed. The spectators that attended the Due to a Brand Fever that began in 2024 did not manifest. Because of a player, they appeared. They spent hours